Welcome to This Explainer. Whenever we hear the word inflation, I bet our minds jump straight to the stock market, right? We think about consumer prices, interest rates. We basically treat it like this purely economic math problem. But today, we're going to flip the script. We are looking at inflation through a totally different lens. Because at its core, sticky inflation is actually a massive human resources crisis. So let's just dive right in and unpack why this is literally a blaring siren for HR leaders. We're going to map out exactly how to build an inflation-proof compensation strategy that actually works.
Okay, so the macro reality we've got to face right out of the gate is that central banks, like the RBI, are fiercely prioritizing inflation over simply pushing rate hikes. What does that actually mean for the corporate world? It sends one very loud, very clear signal. Stability matters way more than drama right now. Because when inflation stays sticky, it translates directly, and I mean directly, into rising cost pressures in your employees' everyday lives. Just imagine a mid-level manager trying to figure out a sudden massive spike in their family's grocery bill or utility costs. When that real-world financial pressure hits home, weak HR planning gets exposed incredibly fast. You just can't run on autopilot anymore and hope those standard, run-of-the-mill annual raises are magically going to keep everyone happy.
Because this is not just some abstract economics theory. Sticky inflation creates a brutal, undeniable ripple effect straight through your entire organization. Step 1. It hits the paycheck. The actual, real-world purchasing power of an employee's salary drops. Step 2. That drop in value immediately sours employee sentiment. People are feeling the pinch at the supermarket, and guess what? That financial anxiety walks right through the office doors with them every single morning. And then we hit Step 3. That souring sentiment completely fractures retention. If your people feel they literally cannot afford their lives on their current salary, they are absolutely going to look somewhere else. It is a straight, completely logical line from macroeconomic data right to your absolute best talent walking out the front door. So this drops HR right onto an incredibly dangerous tightrope, caught between two huge extremes. Think about it. If you decide to just play it safe, wait too long to act, maybe secretly hoping this whole inflation thing just blows over, attrition starts quietly. People don't necessarily complain. They don't flip desks. They just quietly update their LinkedIn profiles during their lunch break and vanish. But on the flip side, if you panic, if you overreact and bump up base pay across the entire board to match every single inflation spike, your payroll is going to become entirely unsustainable overnight. Your company's profit margins will absolutely crater, and suddenly you've locked in a permanent fixed cost for what might be a temporary economic spike. Walking that tightrope means you are essentially getting squeezed from both sides. If you ignore the reality of inflation, your employees are going to feel completely shortchanged. They'll feel like the company is just oblivious to their real-world struggles, and that breeds some serious, deep-seated resentment. But if you swing the other way and ignore business reality by handing out structural raises the company simply can't afford, your executive team is going to lose all trust in you. They're going to view HR as dangerously disconnected from the bottom line. You basically have to thread the needle perfectly between deep employee empathy and the harsh reality of business viability. So put yourself in their shoes for a second. What is actually going through your employees' minds when these massive cost pressures hit? Well, the number one thing to remember is what they absolutely do not want. They do not want vague answers. And they definitely don't want long-winded macroeconomic explanations about why corporate margins are so tough right now. They watch the news. They already know it's tough out there. What they are actively craving is fairness and clarity. Above all else, they expect actual, tangible salary corrections. They want to know exactly where they stand and exactly how the company plans to treat them fairly during a really difficult economic cycle. Which brings us right to the ultimate dilemma. This is really the central question of this whole explainer. How in the world does HR balance both sides of this brutal squeeze? How do you do it without destroying business margins on one hand or losing your top-tier talent on the other? How do you give employees the fairness they so desperately need while giving leadership the sustainable payroll they demand? Well, the answer is stepping away from emotional, knee-jerk reactions and shifting aggressively toward concrete structural systems. Let's actually break down those structural fixes, because this is how you build a proactive playbook. It really comes down to 3 practical steps. First up, you've got to rely on market data, not assumptions for your pay decisions. You need hard, unassailable facts to justify your moves to the skeptics in the C-suite and to your anxious employees. Second, and I cannot stress this enough, this is absolutely crucial, you have to separate your structural salary corrections from your standard annual performance increments. They are 2 completely different mechanisms, and if you treat them like one big, muddy pool of money, it's just going to breed resentment. Third, if fixed pay budgets are incredibly tight and base salaries literally cannot budge, lean heavily into variable pay. Give your top performers a clear, direct path to earn more through their actual output. That protects the company's fixed margins while properly rewarding the hustle. Now, to actually execute those structural fixes, you need a serious game plan, a proactive playbook, and it all starts with timing. You have to review your compensation bands before the pressure reaches a boiling point. And when you make those pay decisions, you must explain them with absolute clarity. Remember, no vague corporate speak. Crucially, you've got to equip your managers to handle these really tough conversations. They are literally your front line. If a manager stumbles during a one-on-one about pay, the whole strategy falls apart. You also need to watch employee sentiment like a hawk, picking up on those quiet signals before they suddenly turn into 2 weeks' notice. And finally, build a logical triangle for your rewards. Link them explicitly to employee performance, the criticality of their specific role, and the actual affordability for the business.
When you take all of those playbook steps into account, this entire strategy really just boils down to one undeniable truth. It's so simple, yet so powerful. Good HR does not react late. Good HR prepares early. Listen, inflation is not some sudden, out-of-the-blue surprise event. It is a measurable, tracking economic condition. If you're sitting around waiting for your top engineers or your best sales leads to knock on your door and complain about the cost of living, you are already way too late. You're completely trapped in reaction mode. Being a true strategic HR leader means anticipating that pressure and having your framework fully ready to deploy before a single person even has to ask.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to challenge your current approach with one final thought. Ask yourself this, and be honest. Are you actively building your pay strategy right now, or are you just waiting around for your employees to force the conversation in a total panic? Don't let inflation dictate your company culture. Get ahead of it. Build the strategy, train your managers, and start communicating with absolute clarity today. This is a real game changer if you get it right. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.